Yeah, let the big dog hunt. Hello again, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Kallas Remarks with your host, Joe Staszak, co-host Steve Kallas. Steven, how you doing, my friend?
Doing okay, hanging in there, Joe. Great to be with you as always.
You too. I know you're a little dinged up. You feeling all right there?
I'm feeling fine.
You're looking good, my friend. So believe it or not, you kind of wake up from the Super Bowl and all of a sudden the NBA and NHL playoffs are here. That went kind of quick. You got the draft next week, so there's still some things happening. Keep us interested. So I know you love the 7 to 10 playoff games in that round. Playoffs are set now, 1 through 8. I hear you. You kind of think it feels like the ones versus the eights are like ones versus 16s in the NCAA tournament, but the Heat did make it to the finals a couple years ago when they beat the Bulls, in a
You're
seven
right.
matchup, and they got there. They didn't win, but they got there. So, and the Heat with Jimmy there, they made some noise too. They got to the finals again, kind of surreptitiously. But you're right. It feels like, and I know they do it. They tried to do it to kind of eliminate. Tanking, but it still happens. But they're set, and here they are. And what do you think?
I don't think the Grizzlies can beat OKC, and I don't think Miami can beat the Cavs. I don't know if it's a 1 against 16 game, but it's not, it would be shocking. Now, you're right. The Heat did go all the way that one year, and good for them. But to me, it just says if you come in seventh in your conference in the old days and you're, a little over 500 or whatever, that was, good job. You could do better next year. In baseball, when there were 8 teams in the league and you were under 500 and you finished fifth out of 8, you were in the second division. The notion that you could like win the World Series was a joke. And I used to write a lot of columns about baseball. God, God bless baseball. Excuse me. God bless baseball because they didn't have wild cards. And of course, the first year they had a wild card, I think it was 2002, the Angels won, I think. A wild card team won. So all they've done, and I'll say it forever, in every sport, hockey, football, basketball, and baseball, they've cheapened the regular season. Oh man, if we can only win 3 games, we can be 10th. You never know what can happen in the
You never know
playoffs.
what can happen,
Now,
right?
we do have in hockey, as you know, with the hot goalie thing that you don't have in the NBA. 8 seeds can and have won the cup.
They have.
But even with Miami getting there, no 8 seed has ever won the.
They've never won it, right?
So I don't know. But having said that, so is I think it's all for this.
It
People
is
pay for these play-in games. I think they don't call them playoff games, but they're playoff games.
pretty
It's
much.
just you've got terrible teams playing in the playoffs. Although again, Golden State won. You don't want to play Golden State now.
No,
The Lakers with Doncic and Reeves, not just LeBron, you don't really want to play them. Um, and I feel a little bad for AD because he got knocked out of the playoffs yesterday. It's not his fault he got traded. And he had 40 points and 9 rebounds, and they lost by like 14 or something.
yeah,
Now, in their defense, Kyrie was hurt. Kyrie didn't play. If Kyrie plays, they make the playoffs.
I think so.
So
They were in the finals last year.
yeah, well, I think very few teams make the finals and then don't make the playoffs. I don't, there must have been a list on ESPN. I don't know, but there must have been a list. And you give the Heat credit because they were playing well. They were great in the first game. They were up 17 on Atlanta in Atlanta. Atlanta came back and forced overtime. Then the Heat won by 9 in overtime. And Hero's a star. He's almost like lost in Miami now. They had 30 points, 8 rebounds, 7 assists. This guy Mitchell off the bench, who's averaging 7 a game. I think he hit 3 or 4 threes. He had 16 and 5 assists. And in the overtime, they dominated. And Trey Young, he got kicked out of the last game. And but he's Trey Young. He had 29 and 11 assists, but it wasn't enough. And again, the Grizzlies' jaw looked healthy to me. He looked very healthy at 22, 7 rebounds, 9 assists. I don't know if you saw that dunk off I don't know if it was a foul shot
I
or a miss.
did.
And it
Ridiculous.
bounced off the back and just came right to him. He was up in the air and threw it. He's like a foot
He
over
did that
everybody.
like it seemed like he did it intentionally. Kind of when the guy was defending him, he kind of threw it off and boom, it was wow.
Yeah.
That's
So,
hard to do
I
if
give
no
them
one's on
credit.
you.
I give them credit for getting here, but these 1 seeds this year, the knock on them for me is no super playoff experience.
Mhm.
I don't know how many, if any, guys have won championships. I don't know how many, if any, guys have won the conference finals to get to the championship, but I know it's not a lot. And so at the end, if you're the Cavs playing the Celtics, I kind of like the Celtics. Now, OKC is so good, you would think maybe they can get over the hump and beat everybody because they always showed the standings starting at number two in the West because OKC was so far in front. I saw a thing on ESPN. I think they're they won their games by 12.9 points, an average of 12.9 points, and it's the highest ever in the history of the NBA. But I'll say the same thing for them because the West is tougher. We talked about this before. Reminds me a little bit of when Jordan was in the East. Yes, they won six titles. Yes, 6 for 6. Yes, six MVPs. But back then, the West had like four or five teams and they beat each other up.
Mhm.
And the Bulls usually had a fairly easy trip to the finals. And I think that helped the Bulls. Not knocking the Bulls, they did what they did. And it kind of strikes me here for OKC. They might be the best in the West. I don't know if they can win a conference final to get to the NBA finals, but there's three, four, five other teams you don't want to play in the West. It's not like that in the East. The Knicks are third, I think. And the Knicks couldn't beat anybody above them. It's really, to me anyway, the Celtics and the Cavs in the Eastern Conference Final. In the West, I don't know. Like I said, there's four or five teams. OKC is on paper in the regular season head and shoulders, but as you know, playoffs is a different deal.
Different animal. So let's do it right now. Who do you like to win the whole thing?
I like the Celtics based on experience. I think they're going to have an easy trip in the East. I think Tatum, who I thought was the MVP, I think we talked about this last year. I thought Tatum was the MVP of the finals last year. He got none of those. Jaylen Brown, who's, don't get me wrong, excellent as well. He got all the accolades, I think. He certainly got MVP of the finals. I said, wow, I thought it was Tatum. And I think Tatum has played with a bit of a chip on his shoulder. One guy I heard mention it, but I haven't heard a lot saying Tatum has something to prove. He probably doesn't have anything to prove, but I thought he was the MVP last year, and I think he wants to be the MVP this year. And it would be a big surprise to me if they don't come out of the East. In fact, I saw the numbers. I don't know if you saw this, Joe. It's a little weird. Again, not gambling on this stuff, but the Celtics are minus 200 to win the Eastern Conference, and the Cavs are plus 100, oh, plus 190 to win. So I don't know if either of those is any good, but I think that's the finals in the East because the Knicks can't, they were 0-10 against the good teams.
Hmm.
And, actually they're playing the Pistons. The Pistons could give them a run for their money. The Pistons have totally, flipped this year. And who are the Pacers after that? I mean, I don't think they can go with the top two. That's why I like the Cavs to at least make the Eastern Conference final. But how many champions do they have on the Celtics? They got to have 8, 9, 10 guys,
Hmm.
including their stars. Porzingis is healthy and playing real well. They're going to be tough to beat, I think. If I have to pick someone to win it all, I'm picking the Celtics. But again, they might be the favorites to win them all. They might be second or third to somebody in the West. But I think they're the best team. They have the experience. They seem to be healthy. Porzingis missed a lot of games early, but I watched him against the Knicks a week. I think it was against the Knicks. They beat him in overtime. Yeah, when Jaylen Brown was a little hurt, and Porzingis hit three shots literally from like 30 feet. No exaggeration. You got a 7'4" guy who can do that.
If you can do that consistently, yeah, they should.
So we'll see what happens. But yeah, I can't even pick the West. I was rooting for Denver before they
Yeah.
hired Malone, but I ain't rooting for them anymore. And I think OKC can win, but I think that'll be a big step because they're gonna have to beat two real good teams to get to the finals.
Think that had anything to do, the firing of Michael Malone, with the collapse they had? Was it game seven where they were up 30 points against Minnesota and then they ended up losing that series, did they not? Because
I,
Minnesota, you remember
I
that?
Yeah, I don't know because the theory seems to be, well, they talked about how Malone and the GM Booth, I think his name was, didn't get see eye to eye because Booth wanted them to play the young guys, and of course Malone wanted to play the championship guys. I mean, to me that's a no-brainer. Again, I'm biased, as you know, but I did see Perkins on ESPN, and I don't know if he has any inside info, but they won three games, and I think we talked about it. The first game was against Sacramento after Malone got fired. Well, of course they're going to win that game. But Perkins was like, oh, they seem to be having fun out there, and it seems to be a little different. Now, Malone to me is an old-time coach. He'll get on after, and you've seen him get on at the post game and say, yeah, we didn't show enough effort tonight.
But if you're looking at the trend, they won it and then they collapsed. It was a major collapse in a year to try to repeat, didn't it? Because they won it 2 years ago, right?
Yes.
And then last year they collapsed, and Minnesota ended up playing, I think, Boston or Minnesota advanced, and they got knocked out, I think, by Dallas. But that was a collapse. And then this year they weren't, the cream of the crop again. I'm wondering if he's noticing a decline. The GM,
Maybe.
that's why Michael Malone. I don't know. I'm just throwing out.
Maybe, but in what world, and maybe you'll tell me it has happened before, I don't know off the top of my head. In what world do you win a championship and then before the second season after your championship is over, you get fired?
It's really rare, really rare. Eagles, I think, waited 3 seasons to fire Doug Peterson, but maybe.
So, look, do I think Denver can win? Yeah, I think Denver can win. Do I think it's because they have a new coach? I
No,
don't.
no,
But Perkins seems to, so maybe he knows something I don't know. But I will say this, Malone is an old-time guy. His father, who, as you know, coached me in high school and coached in the NBA for 40 years, he was a tough guy. But in the world when you could be a tough guy, Bobby Knight era in college,
sure.
and all those guys going back to who was it in football grabbed the kid's helmet from was it but it wasn't Schembechler, it was the Michigan
No,
Ohio State.
it was
I,
the
I
Woody Hayes.
got it. Huh?
Woody Hayes.
Woody Hayes, yeah, who would do it? Grabbing the guy on the other team. But I mean, you do that now, you get fired.
Yeah.
But I can only say, and I did say here a couple weeks ago, love Malone, great coach, will land on his feet, will have a job next year if he wants one. But it's unusual in today's game for a coach to say publicly, my team didn't give enough effort. Usually that's a locker room thing. I don't know if it was a mistake that he made, but maybe that's how he lit him up for the prior years. Maybe he said that the year they won the championship. I don't know. Uh, but I think it's wrong. You get fired again less than 2 years after you won a championship. I
Little
think that's Bush.
crazy.
I think it's Bush League.
I agree. It was certainly unusual. I'm going with OKC. I think they have the best player. They play defense and they're young, and I think it's their time. That's all I'm going to say about that. And we'll see. We'll check back on it in a little bit.
Yeah.
Little baseball. Yeah, Phillies are now like the Trek of the league. They're
No,
still,
I got the Phillies for you. No,
yeah,
no,
I know, but they
no.
were 7-1, and then they were 9-7 because it's a mess around here. But go ahead, you
Yeah,
go.
but last night they beat the Marlins 7-2. Bryce Harper hit another home run, his fifth of the year. Does he have 3 home runs in 4 games or 4 home runs in 5 games? He's swinging a nasty bat.
Yes.
Um, but I did want to ask you about one other guy. Let me get his name because you will know him, and I didn't really know him. Um, yeah. Tell me about Christopher Sanchez, who now the Phillies have won the last 10 games in a row that he started. He was real good the other day, beat the Giants 6-4. He gave up 2 earned in 7 innings with 12 strikeouts.
He's the guy.
He's the man now.
I mean, Wheeler's still the guy, but he's the next guy.
Well, I'll
Almost.
tell you what, I watched the highlights of that game and they might have shown all 12 strikeouts. I mean, he's got some nasty stuff. And, that's the kind of win 10 in a row. When he goes on, you just say, yeah, we're going to win. We're
Yeah,
going to win. And to win 10 starts in a row in today's baseball, I think that's a big deal.
that's a huge
Even to go 7 innings, I have to admit, is a big deal. But 12 strikeouts.
nowadays, right?
But yeah, I saw well last night. The Mets are 13-7. Lindor hit a game-winning home run in the bottom of the ninth to beat the Cards 5-4, and it was his 250th career homer. People kind of sleep on Lindor because he's a middle infielder, but he's got some pop. He's a real good player. Was he worth 340 million? Well, I guess so. It's crazy. The money's crazy to me, but now you're talking about guys who are getting 700 million, 750 million, 750. When Lindor got 340, I think he was like the second or third player. Trout was the highest. But the Mets are good. The Yankees won a 1-0 game against the Rays. They played at George Steinbrenner Stadium. You know that whole thing because the roof blew off at Tropicana Park. They're playing where the Yankees have where the Yankees have their spring training. I think it seats like 11 or 12,000. I'm not no more than 15. And it's like a Yankee game. But the Yankees did win 1-0. I just want to talk about one. These things just kill me. You know how they say don't make the first out or the third out at third, and you know why. You'll be on second and you can score. So the Yankees are winning 1-0. And in the bottom of the seventh, Jonathan Oranda of the Rays, leads off, and he hits a ball to deep right center field, maybe deep left center field. And you could only see him after he hit the ball. And he certainly didn't sprint out of the box. There's nobody out, Joe. He certainly didn't sprint out of the box. But the ball bounces off the wall. And when the outfielder is Grisham, the center fielder, good center fielder, when he goes to pick up the ball, I think he like stumbled briefly. This guy is rounding first, then he's rounding second. But a perfect throw to Volpe, the shortstop who has a gun. Perfect throw to third. The guy's out. And they show like a close up of him. He stayed on the ground at third base, first out of the inning. And he just stood there. He's like, how did this happen to me? But again, you got a man on second, nobody out, 1-0 game. It's a pretty good chance you're going to score.
Yeah, there's no
So the
need.
only
There's no
time
need.
I think first and third out, the only time you should go to third in those situations, if you're guaranteed to go in standing up. You're
Right.
not guaranteed to go in standing up,
If it's close,
not
there's no
going.
need. Right.
So I think that really hurt them. I did want to talk to you. I've mentioned it briefly before. So the Cubs beat the Diamondbacks yesterday, 13-11. And in the eighth inning, um, the Diamondbacks, who were down 7-1, scored 10 runs to go up 11-7. And I think nowadays they do, look at that, we scored 10 runs. Blah, 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 blah. And in the bottom of the eighth, after giving up 10 in the bottom of the eighth, the Cubs scored six in the bottom of the eighth. So the 10 plus the six, 16 runs, the Cubs would win 13-11. It's the all-time record for runs in an inning. Then they showed the previous, credit to ESPN. They had a picture of the 1922 Cubs. And on August 25th, 1922, the Cubs played against the Phillies and they had scored 15 runs in one inning. So I went to look it up. It was a little lopsided, Joe. The Cubs scored 14 runs and the Phillies scored 1 run. That's the highest, 15. And I went back and I looked a little more like, how were they any good? How did they finish? That year, and back then, National League had 8 teams. The Cubs finished fifth out of 8, and the Phillies finished seventh out of 8. They weren't very good. But in that game in 1922, which I think is the record, you thought it might be something else, but I think it's the record. The Cubs won that game in 1922, 26-23.
I stayed home from school one day. I used to usually do that when they'd play in Chicago because it'd be an afternoon game, and I listened to it on my transistor in bed, like, Mom, I'm sick. And Schmidt hit 3 home runs. Like Randy Lurch, the pitcher, hit two. And they won 23-22. I thought that was the highest scoring game.
Well, as you know, we just looked it up before, and it's
Yeah.
26-23 Cubs that day, which, by the way, was not played in Wrigley Field. It was played in Cubs Park. I don't know when Wrigley bought the Cubs, but it wasn't Wrigley Field back then. But it's still the field then as it is today, kind of like Fenway Park. I don't know if Fenway Park was Fenway Park when it opened, but whatever. I just thought that's kind of a weird, fascinating, one of those things in baseball. You go to a baseball game, you might see something you've never seen before. Well,
Yeah.
nobody's ever seen anybody get 16 runs in one inning
That's
combined.
interesting. I thought considering there's been a zillion games, I thought that number would be a little higher, but that's good stuff. Stuff you only learn here on Kallas Remarks. Well done, my friend, our research department and star host, Steve Kallas. Little NHL, bro. We've been watching Ovi, but he broke the record, so we'll just continue watching him continue to break the record. At least
Well, if I could just say that, it's kind of weird the way it works, but the Penguins paid the Caps in the final game of the regular season. Caps with 111 points, they won the President's Trophy. The Penguins with 80, they didn't make the playoffs. But before the game, the Penguins saluted Ovi. They made an announcement there. They showed Sidney Crosby banging his stick against, how the hockey players do it.
yeah.
So I thought that was pretty cool. Crosby scored his 625th goal in this meaningless game for the Caps, maybe not meaningless for the Penguins. And he had 33 goals this season. Ovi scored his 897th goal, and he had 44 goals this year, Joe, with a
He had a broken leg.
broken leg. Um, and Crosby, with an assist in addition to his goal, became the 10th person in the history of hockey to have 90-point plus seasons. So that's something to be, good about. I assume Crosby's playing next year. Nobody's talked about him
No,
since
he's
his
probably gone.
farewell,
He doesn't get hurt too much. He
but it was
used
kind
to.
of
It's up
Kind
in
of sad.
Kentucky.
I didn't follow them. They only had 80 points, but you know, it was pretty. The other thing I want to talk about is our guy, Marc-Andre Fleury, who kind of was on his retirement tour, I guess, but he needed one win to get 575 lifetime wins. And they were playing the Anaheim Ducks, who aren't very good. In fact, Minnesota Wild had won 17 of their last 18 games against the Ducks. And so Anaheim's up 2-1 late in the game. They pull Fleury and the Wild tie up the game with 21 seconds left. So now it's overtime. And Boldy scores the game, his 27th of the year. He's a good player nobody knows about to win the game in overtime. And then they mob Fleury, of course, because it was his 575th win. The Ducks, to their credit, this was in Minnesota. They line up to congratulate Fleury like it's a Stanley Cup playoff round, the end of the round, and they shook hands, which I thought was a very, very
Very cool.
classy thing. And I know hockey is the best, and that's the best thing when you shake hands
Oh,
because
I
no
love that.
one does that. They're probably afraid there'd be fist fights. But I give them a lot of credit. And one final thing I'll say about Montreal on Wednesday, they needed a point to clinch, and they got a tie with Carolina and then they won in overtime. So they got the eighth seed by tying that game in regulation, and then they won it, in overtime.
Overtime.
Eliminated. Well, they were already eliminated. They needed 1 point to get in, and they got the point. So I thought that was pretty cool as well.
That's very
I'm
cool.
not sure. The most interesting first round has to be the Panthers against Tampa Bay. And on ESPN, they showed the stat, and I'm sure you know this. In the last 5 years, four of the five, one of the Florida teams won the cup.
Yes.
And the fifth, 2 years ago, Florida lost in the Cup Finals. So it's like go to Florida if you want to be in the Stanley Cup Final.
Right? And the floor.
But it's interesting because they're playing each other now, and people are giving Tampa Bay a shot against Florida, which is pretty interesting. But we'll have to see. Maybe we'll talk about who I like in the Cup Finals next week. But I haven't really. I'll say it again. I think because of the extra playoff teams in hockey, in basketball, the regular season.
Oh, it's watered down. It doesn't really mean much. It really doesn't.
Exactly. So, but we'll be on it next week.
All right. It's all about this. We know that. Appreciate you watching, folks. You can catch Steve's stuff on his daily Facebook forum page, Speaking of Sports with Steve Kallas. Also, his videos on WestchesterCountyPost.com. This podcast on YouTube each Friday or Saturday. And Tuesdays, also an additional podcast during the football season. Good stuff, Steve. You can follow me on Twitter X at Joe Staszak 975 or on Instagram at Joe Staszak 4799. Good stuff, Steven. Have a good weekend. And we'll talk to you on the other side.
Always a pleasure, Joe.
You too, pal. Appreciate it, folks. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you later.